Hello, I'm Pete Fellows and I run the intellectual property recruitment firm Fellows & Associates. Now I'm filming this during the height of COVID-19. It is now September 2020 and the virus is still very much here and all around us. The hope with this video is that I will talk in general terms, so at least some of the things will apply when hopefully the virus is all over, and if you're seeing this in a couple of years' time, I hope you're still getting some advice that's worthwhile from it for you. Also, what's the future like? Do we have flying cars yet? What skills are IP firms looking for to help you up the career ladder? An attribute that firms regularly ask us for is commercial thinking. They want their attorneys to understand where the work they're doing comes from and how they go about getting more of it. As attorneys move through their career, the ability to generate new revenue and not lose any that's already there becomes increasingly important. Client management and business development are arguably the single largest factors that will enable you to progress your career through, hopefully, ultimately to become a partner. However, it can also be difficult to gain experience, particularly when, depending on the culture of the firm, perhaps the partners that you're reporting to keep the lion's share of that experience to themselves. That may not be deliberate on their part, it may just be a structure of the firm and the environment that you're in. You can counter this by taking any opportunity you can to attend client meetings. Whenever you're asked if you want to go, the answer should always be yes. You should try and speak to clients on the phone where you can, and by doing this and going to meetings, hopefully demonstrate to your superiors that you are comfortable speaking to clients of the firm. You take every opportunity to attend networking events. Now they come in a few different sources. You could attend ones run by IP professional bodies such as CITMA or IP Inclusive, but also perhaps it's worthwhile practicing and looking for local networking groups that you can attend. A lot of them are inexpensive and you could maybe even fund it yourself if you're wanting to gain some experience. I realise that networking and client meetings can be daunting, but it only gets more daunting if you don't do it, and it will get a little easier with practice. You'll develop tools to help you to interact more fluently. It's also worth saying that the more people you know, the easier it will be to network. You'll get introduced to people who will introduce you to more people, and your network will grow, which means you'll have to do less cold approaches for business development purposes. Beyond business development, the range of your experience is very important. So that could mean sectors. If you can work across a variety of different industries, that could be really useful, albeit sometimes it can be also quite useful to be a sector specialist. In addition, it's important that you get as broad a range of trademark experience as you can, and where possible ask for more in areas where you're lacking. The breadth of your experience will certainly make looking for a new job easier in the future, or indeed progressing where you are. What would be the advantage of moving to industry versus private practice? It largely depends on where your interests lie. It is possible that workload in industry will be more strategic in nature, dependent on where you fit in the infrastructure. You could have much more involvement in litigation or licensing than you might typically in private practice, and you might have an impact on the direction of travel your company takes, which could be tremendously exciting. Salary in industries can be higher than private practice in the short term, for example at the equivalent of an associate level. In the long term, this is rarely the case, as senior salaries in industry tend to plateau. There are also more senior positions in private practice, so it is potentially easier to reach a higher level. There's typically only one director of trademarks, for example. It can be difficult to move back into private practice if you've been in an industry role for a few years. Changing jobs in industry is much more likely to require a geographical move, particularly at more senior levels, as positions are few and far between. This can mean that you will have the opportunity to work all around the world, but would be difficult if you want to stay in the same location and progress your career. What can you expect from your first few years post-qualification? This is a difficult one to answer, largely because it really depends on who you're working for. The culture of your firm or organisation will be the largest impact on what your job looks like at any point, but particularly post-qualification. There are wide differences between different private practices, trademark firms, law firms, in terms of how quickly someone progresses, what responsibilities they get, and how early they get those responsibilities. If you're in private practice, I would expect more autonomy, more client interactions, more responsibility for billing targets, more responsibility for building business. It's not always the case, but it tends to be easier to move positions once you're qualified. And that period between qualification and around 3-4 years post-qualification will be the easiest time to move positions in your career. Some people decide to move to industry at this point in their career, whereas others can change their circumstance. You can change the experience of your firm and gain more of the things I was talking about earlier in terms of client interactions and business development and networking opportunities. In private practice, it's a good time for you to get a sense of what you have. How long will it take you to progress? What will you progress to? Who has progressed before and how long did it take them to get there? What is the next level? What does that look like? What will your job title be? What will your salary be? What opportunities are there in order for you to progress to that level? And then once you know what you have, then you can decide whether it's worth trading that in for something else, and also whether that something else is going to be better than what you have. Does moving firms give you a career advantage? And what are the risks? The short answer, and you might expect me to say this being a recruiter, is yes. It does, generally speaking, give you a career advantage. Now, of course, that's not always the case. You can make a decision that doesn't work for you and you're in a worse position. But hopefully some of the things that I talked about in the previous answer will apply, that if you've done more research and you know what you're stepping into, then you can mitigate some of those risks of moving. And that research is really crucial when moving jobs. If you can really pin down what it is that you want, then when you move jobs, you can make sure that you get at least some of those things by moving, which is why it gives you a career advantage, because you're achieving some of your goals in a more rapid order than you would have done if you'd stayed. Now, of course, there can be advantages in terms of salary as well. Normally speaking, if you move positions, you achieve a higher salary than you would have done if you'd stayed. Again, that's not always the case, but it is certainly commonly the case. Timing is crucial in this. You can't expect the job market to behave in the way you want it to at the point that you're ready to move positions. Obviously, at the moment, that's even more the case, but even in a normal market, there may not be the jobs around that meet your goals. And you may not know that if you don't know what your goals are, which again is why I'm suggesting that you find out what they are before you decide to move positions. And recruiters can help you with that. And sometimes your goals will change through the recruitment process. You might think that salary is really important, but then you realize that you're giving up so much of the other things that you like in order to achieve a higher salary that it's simply not worth the trade-off. Once you've decided to move positions, you need to give yourself some time. It may take a lot longer than you hoped. And I appreciate that sometimes you really want to move positions quickly, and the downside of that is you're more likely to make a rash decision and move into a position that's worse. If you're lucky and the right conditions in the market exist at the time, perhaps you'll have a few offers to choose from, and you will be in a very strong negotiating position to even more improve your job prospects and your career prospects for the future. And by changing positions and hopefully achieving those goals, moving positions will certainly advance your career. As long as you mitigate some of the risks, then you're much more likely to achieve what it is that you want. There are some other risks. I mean, if you're moving jobs, it's a step into the unknown and it's a life-changing decision. And whenever you're stepping away from something that's known to something that, at least to some extent, is unknown, there's a risk in that. You can mitigate it by taking some of the steps we've discussed, but there is always an element of risk to that. A new job is almost always less secure than an old job, both legally and practically. I mean, you're unknown to them as well, and that may impact how your career progresses, at least initially, until they get to know you better. However, if you do move jobs and you realise that the firm and the opportunity you've moved into is not what you hoped, then don't despair. It's not the end of the world. What's important is not to stick in that position for years and years and years, hoping it will change. Quick decision making is almost always better. If you realise that the position that you've moved to isn't what you expected and not what you want, then moving quickly, if you can, is almost always going to be better. It's much easier to explain a blip of a few months than a year or two in a position that you didn't like. It speaks to your credibility if that's the case, whereas if you've moved quickly, it shows that clearly you didn't like the job because you got out as soon as you can. I appreciate that that's not always possible, and it's perhaps also worth considering going back to the firm that you've left and seeing what they think of hiring you back, and then you biding your time for the future. But you shouldn't really do that disingenuously. You need to think about what you're telling them and how honest you're being with them as well. How do you promote your personal brand internally or externally? LinkedIn is essential. If you are in IP and do not have a LinkedIn account, you're putting yourself at a significant disadvantage. It is great as a tool to be discovered. This could be by recruiters or potential employers, but also for potential clients. If you are attending meetings, you can use LinkedIn to research who you are meeting, but in all likelihood, they will also research you. Having an excellent profile can create a great early impression. I've been attending international conferences for years, such as the Interannual Meeting, and most people I meet across the world are on LinkedIn. It allows for an easy way of keeping in touch without having to proactively email and call people. In respect to other social media, there is a good take-up of IP professionals on Twitter. It's not essential, but could be a way of building a profile. Social media is in constant flux, and the usefulness of various providers will vary over time, although LinkedIn has been consistent. It is useful to keep an eye on trends, but also be careful with your own messaging on social media. The internet has a very long memory, and it is not uncommon for organizations to research social media profiles of prospective applicants. In addition to a virtual network, you need to build a real-life one. Attend any opportunities you can for networking events, particularly professional bodies such as CITMA, Inter, or industry groups like IP Inclusive. If your firm doesn't make this easy for you, then you should try to attend them on your own steam. Many IP-related events are free or inexpensive, and the experience will be invaluable. I appreciate I've made this point earlier in the video, but it is worth re-emphasizing. As for building your personal brand internally, I think it largely depends on what your firm is like. What will work will vary considerably. Make yourself visible beyond your immediate line manager where you can, volunteer for activities, and be involved. What is the difference between private practice titles, such as senior associate or partner, and how are they defined? Okay, well, terminology in the trademark sector, also in the patent sector, is very fluid and actually fairly ill-defined. Generally speaking, you progress from trainee, then you qualify and you become an associate, then you become a senior associate, and then eventually a partner. But within that very broad framework, there are huge discrepancies from firm to firm and other titles, etc., etc. Sometimes trainees are referred to as technical assistants and often informally as part qualified. Attorneys are normally referred to as an associate once they qualify. Again, it's not always the case, but it's mostly the case. The title senior associate is also problematic. Sometimes you become a senior associate almost as of right. If you've worked for a firm for a few years, at that point you become a senior associate. Other firms, it's a meritocracy and you only become a senior associate if you earn it. And that means there are huge differences between what defines a senior associate from firm to firm and has implications on the job market as well. What is a partner is even more complicated. I think when most people think of a partner, they think of someone being at the top of the firm who essentially is an owner of the firm and shares the profits of the firm. They're self-employed and the profits are split equally between the partners. It's typically called an equity partner. But not all partners are equity partners. Sometimes they're salaried and they are essentially senior associates, but with more responsibilities, but they're still on a salary. Sometimes they're what's called fixed share equity partners. So they're paid a monthly amount that's consistent, like a salary, but perhaps they're self-employed, like an equity partner, but their income is only nominally affected by the profits of the firm. Voting rights also differ from firm to firm. So in some firms, all partners, whether they're salaried or equity partners or FSEs, have voting rights on most issues, usually with the exception of voting for more people of a particular status. So salaried partners couldn't vote themselves into the equity, for example. In other firms, voting rights are the exclusive domain of equity partners. So those circumstances really vary from firm to firm. Then to add even more confusion, some firms aren't partnerships. They're limited companies, they're PLCs. So what they call a partner, if they use the title partner, isn't the same as a partnership and the way that firm uses its title. It may be similar, there may be a sharing of profits, there may not be, but it really becomes very complicated. Some firms that aren't partnerships but have a different business structure use the job title director instead of partner. However, this is complicated by the fact that some firms that are partnerships also use the job title director. In this latter case, director, not always, but often is a job title in between senior associate and partner, whereas in a firm that isn't a partnership, it might be the equivalent to a partner. So to be fair, I wouldn't get too worried about the job title you have. It's more important as to what it means. This complicated picture of job titles means determining direct equivalency is very difficult for recruiters, for firms, and for candidates. As has been a theme through this presentation, you really should do your research. Moving from a senior associate to an associate position somewhere else, or indeed in the other direction, may not be the step down or the step up that you think it is. And that's it. I hope this has been useful. I hope I've answered some of your questions. If you'd like to know more about Fellows and Associates, you can visit our website at www.fellowsandassociates.com. You can visit me on LinkedIn. I'm at petefellows.com. And I hope to speak to you all in the future. Thank you very much.